Welcome to The State of Us.
Beyond mainstream cable news and party lines, with a millennial and a boomer, The State of Us pushes past the noise and uncovers all the issues that matter.
Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Can books compete with Netflix? Yes, and here's why, according to an article in the Wall Street Journal. The latest COVID-19 trend is binge reading. Independent bookstores are happy to oblige with special offers, free delivery, and more. A lot of families are going to need restructuring by the time COVID is over. They probably needed it before. And the questions you wish you'd asked your parents. And you may still have time to ask them. Those are our three topics today, three headlines, some from the Wall Street Journal, some from the New York Times. We're going to break down each of them, so it's going to be a very full show for you. But of course, we couldn't begin a conversation on reading, families, and parents without
True Chat senior historian and an educator of more than 30 years. Here is your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
Well, it might come to a surprise to some of our listeners, but the old redneck here is a good reader and likes to read and has always enjoyed reading. As far as, so that one, I'm all over it. Been married now for, let's see, in December, it will be 38 years to the same young lady that I started dating in high school. And I understand the importance of talking to your parents. I'm learned by reading the article that people don't do that. At my house, that was always done. That was modeled for us since the time I can remember, having family birthdays, Thanksgiving, and Christmas at my grandparents' house. That was just the norm of the conversation that took place. So I found that article particularly interesting. So there's my take on the three topics, and I'm out.
All right. Thanks, Lance. We'll see you next week.
I'm feeling feisty today, guys. Sorry about that. We'll try to stay within the parameters of the show, but it's a struggle today for the friendly redneck liberal.
We don't even have hot button issues. These are, hopefully they shouldn't be controversial ones. They're more just, hey.
I'm going to make them that way just because that's what I'm feeling.
Okay. All right. Well, the first one, can books compete with Netflix? A new trend with COVID going on, a lot of people spending more time at home, right, is binge reading. So the article actually highlights a few people who may have read 3 books, for an entire year and who have already polished off, more than 30 or 40 books. This is something I think I'm excited about, Lance, because I'm hoping that it's something that sticks. People are finding that, okay, if I'm going to have to spend all this time, where I'm not working, and they start spending it all on screens, they start to have this desire to not spend all their time that way, right? We've talked some about the, that was a couple episodes ago where, when we make people do something, right, like sports, I think is what we were, the strenuous life, that's what it was. When we make things an obligation, right, or a work thing, or we feel like we have to do it, then we quit wanting to do it as much. And so, screens often become an escape. But then the escape in and of itself you get tired of, and you need something to get away from all of that to relax and chill out. And reading happens to be, right, an excellent way to do that. So the article tells us, right, Lance, about some bookstores. And they're kind of trying to get innovative here because, if people can't physically go there, you might turn to Amazon, but they're doing some different things to try to keep people supporting local business, right?
No, that's true. They do. They've got all kinds of, there's like trading clubs going on out there. And in the age of COVID, a lot of the bookstores are seeing that they're doing the delivery or the no contact pickup of books that people have ordered. They've started book clubs where you can sign up and they just send you a box of books every month, a mixture of hardbacks and paperbacks. So, and you just get, and you can list what you like to read, like I love to read mystery books and historical books and fiction. And the other thing is not only has COVID-19 taught us to slow down and do some of the things that many of us used to do. I mean, I've been a voracious reader since I was 5 or 6 years old. I mean, that was I was lucky. I lived in a small town and the local library was two blocks away. And I was allowed, by second or third grade to walk to the library myself and turn in my books and get a whole armload of books and come back. And those were some of the happiest days I had in the summer, was going to get books. That doesn't mean I wasn't active. I was riding my bike and doing all other kinds of things, but I love to read. And I think this slowing down time has for us given us a chance to revisit that. And as we've talked about, it's also important for people's brains, that when we spend more than 15 seconds looking at a screen and pictures, we start to develop some more of our brain cells, and our thinking ability and our cognitive abilities become better. And so this has an all around good taste to it. Plus, sitting down with coffee and your favorite munchie or a cold drink and your favorite munchie is a good way to spend an afternoon or an evening with a good book. So it's and the thing is here, folks, read anything. There was one lady in the article who talked about reading graphic novels. And I know my wife, who's a junior high English teacher, recommends that to her students all the time who don't like to read. Read something.
Right. There's a lot of different options. And I think that's part of the key is I think everybody can find something, or almost everybody. When we talk about, though, why you should care about this, maybe you're out there and it's like, well, I'm not a reader. I don't know. Am I really going to get into reading? Well, this could be you. 68%. Or 164 million Americans, Lance, struggle with sleep at least once a week. That could be falling asleep or staying asleep. 68% of our country, almost 7 in 10 Americans struggle with sleep once a week, and 27% of Americans struggle with sleep most nights. And that could be falling asleep or staying asleep. And so what does that have to do with anything? Well, you probably know from experience, because as we know, most Americans at some point have struggled with this. When you don't get good sleep, it's awful hard to have a good day. And when you don't have a good day, other things get worse, and it's a bad snowball effect. Sleep is, unfortunately, it is something that is very a big factor, right, in how productive or how well we enjoy our time awake. And so this is where reading comes in. Bedtime reading reduces stress. In fact, it was found that reading worked best out of a number of different things studied. Reading reduces stress levels by 68%, in comparison to listening to music, 61%, drinking tea or coffee, 54%, and taking a walk, 42%. It only takes 6 minutes of reading for stress levels to be reduced.
Is that all times of the day?
Yes.
Because I like to read early in the morning. Yep. I'm not a nighttime reader, probably because it puts me to sleep, but that's good for any time of the day, because I know that when I wake up, when I pick up a newspaper to read, or I pick up a book and I read, I'm much happier the rest of the day.
If you spend time on your phone before bed, scrolling through social media or watching TV, there's several things at play. Blue light emissions is a big one of them, and that makes it difficult for you to fall asleep. And also, it works different muscles. Reading actually allows your muscles to relax and slows down your breathing, leaving you feeling calmer. And again, that's at any time of day. So if you're feeling stressed, or like you have a lot on your plate, if you can find 6 minutes to read, and again, that's the whole point, right? I think people think about reading, it's like, oh, I'm going to spend 5 hours reading this book. And it's like, no, it doesn't have to be that. If you can find 6 minutes before bed to read instead of spending that time on your phone or in front of a TV or some other screen, you might be surprised, because 39% of people who are in the habit of reading before they go to sleep say that they sleep very well when they read. Reading is more neurologically challenging than speaking or processing images, which is what you're generally doing if you're watching TV or looking at a screen. It also, Lance, decreases the likelihood of Alzheimer's. Yes. A study found that people who engage their brains in an activity like reading or solving puzzles are 2.5 times less likely to develop the illness. Reading before bed specifically also improves creativity. Children who read are exposed to 50% more words from books than they would be from TV. And the expansion of vocabulary lends itself to creativity.
I know people might find this really weird, but my daughters, who are millennials, when they went to bed, most kids go to bed with their favorite animal, stuffed animal, or their favorite toy or whatever. My daughters always went to bed in a pile of books. And I mean, they, slept upstairs, and we would know when they would fall asleep because we start hearing thud, thud. And as they were moving and getting settled, it was the books they had in bed hitting the floor. What that is that's just an anecdotal piece of evidence to describe what you've been talking about. I mean, they were like an extension of, they were their toys, their favorite stuffed animals. Not that they didn't have toys or stuffed animals, and they weren't made to read. They would, after we read stories to them, they would ask, can you leave a couple books in bed with us? And even before they could read, they would just look through them.
Interestingly enough, one of the reasons, Lance, that people cite not reading before bed is because it makes them tired, which is ironic because obviously that would be the point of the purpose.
That's what you're supposed to do, right, when you go to bed.
You mentioned it.
Yep.
But it is actually proven that for most people, reading does actually make you tired if it's at night. And the reason for that is because of the very precise eye movements that are required. It wears out your eyes faster, and at the end of a long day, you may also choose to read in a place like bed that's associated with sleep. The two together tend to make people fall asleep faster than most other forms of activity that they might do before bed. But that's precisely the reason you do it, because I think part of what people get frustrated with is like, man, I was only reading for like 5 minutes and then I fell asleep. Yeah, that's kind of the point. It's not, you don't read before bed to read a lot. You read before bed to sleep better and get to sleep.
Hey, better than taking an antidepressant or some melatonin or something like that, right?
Yes.
Just pick up a book, expand your mind a little bit, and you don't have to take as many pills, maybe.
It is, it's an active process, but it's a calming process. And that's a big key to reading before bed. And again, anecdotally, like Lance said, I can tell you that nights where I do read before bed, which I don't get done every night, but those nights that I do, they are by far the nights that I sleep the best. And I may only read a few minutes, especially it depends on what I'm reading. If I'm reading one of my my history books or my book on Rome or something that's a little bit more knowledge dense, I tend to go to sleep a lot faster than books that are read for fun. But the other thing is too, if you're one of those people out there that wants to be successful in the world, the average CEO reads 60 books a year, Lance, and these are some of the busiest people on planet Earth. Warren Buffett admits that even in the height of his busy life, he would spend upwards of 5 or 6 hours a day reading. And if that doesn't tell you something about the wealthiest people in the world, well, I don't know what does. But they have decided, right, of all the things they could spend their time on, that they're going to carve out hours of their day, not minutes, hours of their day frequently to read. Same way that if you're a fan of Elon Musk, that he taught himself how to build a rocket, he read about it. So I think there's a lot of good anecdotal evidence, but there's also the hard evidence we've shared. So hopefully it's an incentive for some people to take a look at books. And speaking of which, Lance, right, we talked about decreasing stress. Well, the next segment is a bit about stress because a lot of families are going to need restructuring by the time this COVID thing is over. They probably needed it before, according to an opinion piece in the New York Times. What are we talking about? Does your family need restructuring? Well, find out. Keep it here on The State of Us. We'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
One of the few good things about a deadly pandemic is that if you are a person who enjoys talking on the phone, as the author of this article is, you will now have lots of time to do this. Far more time than you ever did during your regular life. Now, what does that have to do with families needing restructuring? Well, the author of this article, it's an opinion piece in the New York Times, Lance, I think essentially, right, contends that basically by having the pandemic, people are spending more time together, more time at home, and this is bringing out, right, or perhaps exacerbating some of these tendencies that might have annoyed us, right, about other members of our family. And so we're spending all this time closed up together, and now we're realizing that we may not like some of these things as much. And we don't have the data yet, but one of the things that's contended in the article is, and I wouldn't be surprised by this at all, if we see a spike in divorces through 2020 as a result of being stuck constantly at home together. And the author goes on to kind of take on the concept of perhaps, that the idea, right, of the nuclear family in and of itself is not an idea that should continue. If it works for some people, great. If it doesn't, then we shouldn't allow society to trap us into believing that that's what has to be done. Again, this is not, I'm not contending this. I'm just merely relaying what I believe to be the argument of the article. Is there anything, Lance, that you think she's contending that I have left out before you and I get into what we think about it?
Well, I think that, besides the fact that what having to spend more time with somebody does, it either points out your strengths or the weaknesses
both
in that friendship. And so when you talk about marriage, you're talking about being friends. And if you weren't friends to begin with and you got married for other reasons, then that causes problems, and having to spend more time with one another, not running around taking kids to ballet lessons and soccer practice and running from event to event. And all you had to do was, say hi as you were brushing teeth and getting a shower in the morning and sitting down and saying, well, how was your day? Well, how was your day? And okay, kiss, good night. I'll see you in the morning. If that's all you were doing and you weren't strengthening those ties that brought you together, then yes, of course, the pandemic's going to start to tear you apart. The one big thing that I took away from the article that she made was that things are different now. And I thought about it. When my mom was growing up, there were older ladies in the neighborhood who would help her out. I remember spending time at other people's houses where, like, my mom would send me over and I'd haul firewood, or I'd cut the elderly lady's yard or something like that. And I noticed, and as I think about it as an adult, those were times then that my mom could get things done at home and could have some peace and quiet so that she was a better mom when I got back. And we don't see that now. And I think that was a major point that she made, is that families used to live close together. I know in the case of my wife, her grandparents, one of her sets of grandparents lived just down the street, and she had an aunt, her mom's sister, who lived just across the street from her grandparents. So within a 5-house radius, there were 3 families that were related. And so even though they didn't live in the same house, kids bounced back and forth between those 3 houses all day up and down the street. And I think that was the contention that she was making, is that in this nuclear family, hey, we're going to go out, get married, raise our kids, and we're going to live where we want and do what we want, and we don't need any help. We can just do it all ourselves. And I think it just spotlights that that's not really true. That you need to have those connections, and it doesn't necessarily have to be family, but it has to be, in her case, she was talking about older women who could, kind of guide her through the rough times.
The author, Kim Brooks, who wrote this article, she writes, earlier this year, the Times columnist David Brooks, who is of no relation to this columnist, wrote an essay for The Atlantic called "The Nuclear Family Was a Mistake." He offers 2 different lines of reasoning. First, that the sprawling clans and extended families that lived and worked together in previous generations were more resilient than today's quote-unquote nuclear families. And second, that extended families offer a socializing force, providing children with more numerous and varied examples of adults' relationship. Now, I think, and this is what you were getting at, Lance, it's this idea, right, of we think that we can have the nuclear family today and not have that extended family network, that diverse network of families. And the whole point is, well, the original concept was a clan mentality where you might have 15 to 30 members of family that you see on a regular basis. Well, for most, that's not the case anymore. You may have 4, right? Or 3. And that is a big difference. I'm not sure that necessarily anything's changed from the human wiring standpoint, as it has that we've never really been intended to, only be able to deal with 3 people in our life ever on a regular basis. We are used to interacting with a clan of people that is probably comprised of around 15 to 30. And what happened is, right, as we've shifted away from our clan being family and to work or other associates, COVID hits, and now we're not seeing those people anymore. And now we're stuck with only, 3 or 4 people, and that, or less, right, if you're living alone. And I think that's part of what you're seeing is putting a strain there that you might not have seen before. She goes on to say, certainly this argument is a controversial one. Americans idealize marriage and the nuclear family. People still believe in them, maybe even more than they believe in God. Even as over the past decades, we've become more tolerant about who is allowed to participate in these institutions, the institutions themselves haven't changed much. To suggest then that marriage is not working for many Americans, particularly those trying to raise children, is to undermine the foundation on which many people have built their lives. And of course, and that's the end of the quote there, my contention then is, of course, that's part of why we feel such a strong pushback when we talk about, a few weeks ago, Lance, right, we talked about the possibility of having more than 2 parents. Whether or not people realize it, I think part of the pushback that they feel to something like that, or parents who aren't in love, right, who are raising a child together because they are friends, not married. I think part of the reason that we push back to that is because American society, right, in many ways is built around that idea of marriage and a spouse and a family in a very traditional sense, right, 2 people and children. Even so much as to put pressure on single people, right, to feel like they're inadequate if they don't do that.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, but I would go even further back into history and take the Pilgrims and the Puritans and the puritanical view of, as a person, you're married to the church as God and married, and that whole belief system is still so ingrained in our society that we don't look around and say, you know what, there are a lot of different ways to skin a cat. There are a lot of different ways to raise a family, to raise children, to live your life, and that you should be able to do that. Now, I think it's very important, as you spoke, that you need to have that clan. But why does that clan have to be blood relatives? And some of them, half of them are, even if they're married, are only blood relatives through marriage. They're not even your blood. Somebody else in your family just went and chose them. They're not, your same DNA makeup. So I think it's something that we do that's almost historical in context, not just societal, or it's societal as well as historical. But I think it is a misnomer, and it makes people who don't, quote, fit into that box, so to speak, feel like they're less than everyone else. And that's really sad, because we all have something to add to help bring up the young people in our society. And you don't have to be married to do that. If you want to be married, fine. If you want to have multiple people that you end up spending your life with, fine. Another point of her article was, we talk about our life like it's a forever period of time. It's not. As the old person in the room here, I'm pushing 60, and you think, man, that's forever. And to me, it seems like just yesterday. So life is not that long. So why should you live in a miserable state if that's what society says you should do? As long as you're contributing to society and you're helping others, why does how you're doing it matter to anybody else? I come from that traditional nuclear family kind of setup, but, I wasn't raised that way. But my daughters, I was thinking about it. Well, yeah, we moved them away, but we took the time to spend time with family, particularly when the girls were little, before they got busy. We would take the time to drive the hour and a half to visit grandparents and spend a Saturday and or a Sunday or an evening with them. So there was that feeling of that clan and family that you're talking about. We did it with people that were around here. We have an older lady that we spent a lot of time at her house here in Urbana, who my daughters call their third grandmother, and that's the way she's looked at by our family. So, there's lots of ways to get to that clan mentality that you're talking about, right, that I think is key. And we shouldn't try to put people and say, you need to do it this way.
I think as you were talking, Lance, what came to my mind is this. It's funny because you and I we were meeting, right, had a production meeting the other day. and we're talking a little bit about all these things, right, that we need to spend money on, or all these things we need to do. And I was just reminiscing on it is ironic so often in life, right, especially when you're young, as I am, as our producer are, we make those, there's plenty of time. There's plenty of time, right? I'm making sacrifices right now, or I'm not living exactly the way I'd like to right now, because I'll get to it later. And actually, that's kind of what our next segment's about, right? Sometimes later never comes.
I tried to give you a good segue there into the third episode of the show.
And so I guess that's the don't wait, right? We shouldn't. We should live in a country. I think the philosophy, the principle, right, that it's built on is one where you can choose the life that you want, and hopefully one that's also productive and contributes to society. And I'm hoping that our society is moving in a direction where we are more empathetic, right, and caring about other people, which if we read more books, we might be. And that's where we have to talk about what can you get from your parents, right? What lessons should you be taking away? Don't wait, because it might be too late and you might never get the opportunity. So what questions should you ask your parents? What should you be asking them right now? And if you're a parent and your children haven't asked you about these questions, how could you invite them to let them know that it's all right to do that? Well, to find out, keep it here on The State of Us, and we'll be right back.
We are The State of Us. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
The questions you wish you had asked your parents. Well, hopefully for a lot of you out there listening, it's not too late. If you're a parent, right, then it's probably something that you should bring up to your children if they haven't brought it up to you. The genesis, Lance, of this article, you want to share a little bit about, because you found this and you felt like it was really important that we bring this up to our listeners. We'll get into the list of questions here in a second, but I wanted you to provide us a little bit of the backstory.
The article's a little older. I think it's from March, but it was written when COVID broke out, and we saw a number of elderly people, we found out, that struck those people much harder than it does other segments of society. And we always think, well, we'll put this off and talk about it later. And we saw our loved ones passing away. And then the article goes into Alzheimer patients, that your parents may be extremely healthy, but they start to lose their mental capacity. It struck me because in my family, as I stated in the opening of the show, this is just something that was always done. It never occurred to me that people didn't know these things. Questions like, how did you and mom meet? Or how did my parents meet? Why did you name me what you named me? What was your favorite thing to do when you were little? What did you think when you first saw me in the hospital? Those are conversations that we've had. I can tell you stories about my great grandparents and answer some of those questions because it was just talked about. So this just really struck home to me that, oh my gosh, there are people out there that don't know that. And then you get to the medical side of things. Your family's medical history can be very important to you as you get older. That things that are happening to you, doctors will ask, well, is this in your family history? I don't know. We never talked about it. So sometimes just to extend your own life, it's important to know, what was going on in the lives of your mom and dad or your grandparents or great-grand, is there a history of cardiac arrest? Is there a history of cancer? Is there a history of diabetes? Those things are very important for you as a millennial to know about your family's history, your medical history. So not only is it just that we're going back to now that kind of divorce article, restructuring of the family, how important is it to feel connected with one another? But not only is it important then to share those things with each other, to have those memories, but it can also be very important from a health perspective as you get older. If you don't know what affected your parents or your grandparents, and therefore the doctors don't get an early start on treating you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the practical side, right, of just the health component. You need to be updated on these things so that when you inevitably go to the doctor at some point and ask, do you have a history of X, you don't all of a sudden sit there and scratch your head and go, I really don't know. I don't think so, but I have no idea. And so I think it's important from that standpoint. But like you said, Lance, too, this is one of those, especially because you and I talk all the time about the division in this country, which is kind of interesting because there's a lot of underlying things in today's program about empathy, right? Books build empathy. When you're connected with more people in a group, you build empathy. And if you listen to your parents' story and how they grew up and you ask them, what was your best memory of childhood? What was your worst memory of childhood, right? You become more empathetic towards them as a person and towards how they grew up. Because I think there's this notion, right, that the old generations think young generations have it easy and vice versa. And the reality is everybody goes through crap in their life. And part of the way that we as a society grow is if we share that with one another openly and are able to let others learn from those experiences, because you may not ever go through the same thing, right? But you may very well experience very similar emotions.
One of the worst times in the average adolescent's life is junior high and middle school. And when you're in it, you're thinking, oh my God, I'm the only one who feels this way. And if you talk to your parents or your grandparents, they're going to tell you, oh man, I hated middle school. It was the worst time of my, you're like, oh, so there is hope. I was just thinking of an example there. And that's the perfect example. If you talk to anybody from any generation, usually their worst time of their adolescence was 6th, 7th, 8th grade, and so when you find that out, you're like, oh, well, they made it. Maybe I can make it too. I mean, you just start, so it just makes you feel like you're part, again, as you're saying, part of that group, but it gives you hope that, okay, I'm not the only one that has ever gone through this before. And it makes you feel like because of that empathy, you feel I can get through this. And we start to treat each other and we have more in common with one another. And the reality is we have a whole lot more similarities than we have differences. And I'll let you go back because you were making some great points, but I'm just thinking now it was bringing me back, and this is just stuff, folks, that wasn't planned. It brings me back to this book that I'm reading for our 6th grade English class that we're teaching online. And and that's what it's all about. It's about these two kids who come from different sides of the track who find out they have so much in common, but the people living on the other sides of the track think they don't know what the other side's like because they've never experienced the other side. And it's so much that the more we find out about one another, the more we're similar, which is why we shouldn't be so divisive. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm very sorry.
No. I would add to that and say, because you know that I'm on that page of we have a lot in common that we miss out on. But the other thing is, I don't know why it's become this thing where our differences have to be so offensive to each other either. Because the reality is that's part of what makes the world interesting, right? If all we did was focus on our similarities, just like if all we do is focus on our differences, the world would be a pretty terrible place. If all we did was focus on our similarities, we'd all get pretty bored pretty fast because be like, man, this is a really boring world where we all just do the same thing. And at the same time, if we focus on differences, then we get the opposite effect. It's this awful place where we all argue and scream and hate each other, and that's no fun either. So it really is the balance of the two. Appreciate differences while also finding time to connect on similarities.
I mean, it's really cool to listen to you talk about flying, but I'm going to stay right here on Earth. Because I don't want to go up there at all. If I jump more than, anymore, it's probably about a 6-inch vertical. But even in my heyday, I couldn't jump that high. I didn't want to get any high. I don't like the second rung of a ladder. But to hear you talk about flying up there and soloing this week is really cool to listen to, because that's something I'll never experience, because I don't know that I will ever at this stage in my life decide to take that on. But I like learning about it and seeing the smile and the laughter in your voice when you talk about flying. So that's a difference that we have, but it makes me like you even better.
Right. Well, and in Lance's case, I mean, it's no secret that I don't get much enjoyment from watching sports on television, but when Lance is having a good day, when he's been able to watch baseball all day and is relaxed and ready to chat it up and tell and listen to people, right? And talk to people about the day. And I think that's part of what this whole thing that we're talking is about, because it's not just about asking your parents questions, right? It's also about asking other people these questions. That's part of how we learn the most about the people that we interact with. I know that it feels like 3 truly different topics today, and while they are, it does go back to the other things that we're talking about. Divorce becomes a reality because people quit listening to one another. It becomes a reality for a lot of reasons. I'm not saying that's the only one. And books help build empathy because we read about these different perspectives, fictional or real. And we get more in-depth in that regard from books. And that just happens to be a reality of how the rest of content is produced. 45-minute programs, right, even over, say, 7 seasons, may not convey as much as 2 or 3 books would. And yet you're probably going to spend more time watching all of that than you would have reading 2 or 3 books. And that's where, not saying cut out TV, right? Not saying that you should stay in a marriage that you're not happy with. And not saying that you have to talk to your parents about this stuff, but it is all things that I think, Lance, hopefully give people something to think about in their life and say, what is the path and approach I should take? And why am I doing what I'm doing? Because those are big things that we talk about a lot. I think we take actions and we don't think about why, right? Or the opposite, we put off taking action because we're afraid of what the consequences of it might be. Or we don't like to think about what's on the other side because we don't know. And that's something that I can't say I'm perfect at. I'm not sure that Lance can either, but it's all something we should try to work on. And if we're conscious of it, then maybe we can do more of it.
You're exactly right. And I mean, the interconnectedness of these topics, we didn't necessarily talk about that in pulling these 3 together, but I think it's become very obvious to me as we've discussed it for the last half hour that they are connected, and there is a lot of connection here, and it hopefully will help us do what we try to do here at True Chat, right? Which is what we've done. And the mission statement here is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. And we talked about empathy and divisiveness and trying to bring people together. And I think that's something that we're all feeling to a large degree today for a lot of different reasons. And so hopefully this has kind of been a feel-good episode. And if you've enjoyed it and it's been thought-provoking for you, please share it with your family and friends and let them in on the secrets and have these conversations coming up at the next family birthday or Thanksgiving, Christmas, whether it's in person or it's Zoom related or Skype or whatever you do, or with your phones, right? Because you guys are on me about, I'm going to have to get a new phone. You can actually see each other while you talk on your phone. Have some of these conversations, whether they're virtual or whether they're in person. And you can help us out by telling everybody that they can find us, The State of Us, on Spotify, Overcast, Stitcher, Apple Podcast, and everywhere podcasts are found.
State of Us is released as a podcast on Tuesdays and Thursdays by 4 a.m. in the Eastern Time Zone. We're also a syndicated radio program, so check your local talk station. If they don't carry The State of Us, tell them they ought to. For The State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
I'm Lance Jackson, and we didn't hear from the Devon creature today, so stay tuned for the next episode.
Special thanks to our recording producer, Devin McCain, editing producer, Bradley Bush, and thank you all, our listeners, for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Be the change. Be sure to check out our website, thestateofus.org, for books, articles, and all the ways to tune in. thestateofus.org.